My name is Aria Monroe. I'm 28 years old. And the night my father quietly wrote me out of his future, I made a decision that rewrote his. It wasn't a gala. It was our company's annual foundation dinner. A charity event. Black tie, press invited. Investors seated in perfect symmetry. Soft gold lighting. Live piano. Cameras positioned strategically. My father didn't humiliate me with a joke. He erased me with precision. Near the end of the evening, he stepped onto the stage to give what everyone assumed would be a routine gratitude speech. Instead, he made an announcement. As part of our long-term succession planning, he said smoothly, my daughter Isabella will assume executive authority over Monroe infrastructure beginning next quarter. Applause filled the ballroom. Then he added casually, Aria has chosen to pursue opportunities outside the company. I hadn't chosen anything. I was seated at table 18. No spotlight, no warning, no conversation beforehand. Several heads turned toward me with polite confusion. I smiled. Because when you grow up in a family that values image above truth, you learn early how to perform stability. My phone vibrated beneath the table. One email. Subject line, transition confirmation. Inside was a formal document stating that my advisory access to executive systems had been revoked effective immediately. No confrontation, no argument, just deletion. That was his method. Control the narrative, control the room, control the paperwork. The applause faded. The band resumed playing. And in less than 3 minutes, my professional identity had been quietly dissolved. But here's what no one in that room knew. 6 months earlier, my grandmother had restructured her assets into a private holding trust, not through a will, through equity conversion. She had transferred conditional voting control into an irrevocable instrument that named me the activating beneficiary. The trigger wasn't a deadline. It was displacement. If I was formally removed or publicly misrepresented in a succession event, control of the trust shifted automatically. No 72-hour clock. No dramatic clause. Just activation. And the moment my father announced I had chosen to leave, the mechanism engaged. He thought he was positioning my sister. What he had actually done was trigger a structural transfer he didn't know existed. Across the room, he was shaking hands, accepting congratulations, discussing vision and continuity. My phone vibrated again. A message from an unfamiliar number. It's done. 3 words, no explanation. But I understood. Ownership hadn't transferred to me directly. It had shifted into the trust's active control, and I was the sole signatory. I didn't stand up. I didn't interrupt the evening. I stayed seated while dessert was served. Because power doesn't always enter loudly. Sometimes it waits for the announcement to finish. And that night, in a ballroom full of applause that wasn't meant for me, everything changed quietly. For most of my life, I wasn't Aria Monroe, activating beneficiary of a controlling trust. I was the adjustment. My sister Isabella was certainty, polished, fluent, decisive before anyone else finished speaking. I was observational. When I was 9, I was diagnosed with a processing delay. Nothing dramatic. Nothing visible. Just enough to make teachers say, she understands, she just takes longer. My father doesn't value longer. He values decisive. Isabella got debate coaches, leadership camps, mentorship dinners with executives. When I asked for tutoring support, my father said, you'll figure it out. Pressure builds strength. Pressure doesn't build strength. It builds silence. So I adapted. I stopped trying to win conversations. I started studying them. I noticed who interrupted whom, who avoided eye contact when financial projections were mentioned, who agreed too quickly. While Isabella learned how to command rooms, I learned how to read them. My grandmother was the only one who noticed. On weekends, I visited her apartment, not the penthouse my father preferred, but her original place overlooking the river. She never rushed me. Instead of correcting how slowly I read, she handed me old shareholder agreements and said, don't rush the words, Watch the leverage. She explained equity like it was architecture. Not loud, not dramatic, structural. Control isn't always where the title sits, she once told me. It's where the signature authority rests. At the time, I thought she was teaching me patience. Now I understand she was teaching me positioning. Inside Monroe Infrastructure. After university, I joined the company. Not as an executive, not even close. Strategic operations analyst. Mid-level, replaceable. Isabella entered the same year. Executive development track. Fast lane. Her meetings had glass walls. Mine had spreadsheets. But spreadsheets tell the truth. I saw irregular capital allocations, deferred risk disclosures, projects announced publicly before internal approvals were finalized. Nothing illegal, just aggressive. Aggressive leadership works until confidence fractures. And confidence is fragile. I never challenged my father directly. That would have been emotional. Instead, I documented patterns. Dates, approvals, contradictions. Not because I planned a rebellion, because I needed clarity. Then, 6 months ago, my grandmother asked me to visit her attorney with her. She didn't look sick. She didn't look frail. She looked deliberate. She converted her personal equity into a governance trust. Irrevocable. Activation clause tied to reputational displacement. Or forced executive removal of a listed beneficiary. Me. Not because she favored me, because she believed leadership should not be inherited blindly. She didn't tell my father. She didn't need to. Trust restructurings don't require public announcements. They require foresight. The pattern repeats back to the foundation dinner. When my father publicly stated I had chosen to leave, he believed he was protecting the brand. But displacement was the exact trigger language embedded in the trust. He didn't remove me privately. He reframed me publicly. That distinction mattered legally. The next morning, before headlines circulated, 3 independent directors received notification from corporate counsel. A controlling block of equity had transferred into active trust management. Signatory, Aria Monroe. Not a will, not inheritance, not sentiment. Governance. My father called me at 6:18 a.m., not to yell, to assess. Did you know about this? He asked. Yes. When? Months ago. Silence. He recalibrated quickly. This complicates things. It clarifies them. He exhaled slowly. You think this gives you authority? It gives the trust voting leverage. Important difference. I wasn't claiming the CEO seat. I was holding the balance point. You're destabilizing succession, he said. No, I replied. I'm preventing consolidation without oversight. That's when I felt it. Not anger, not fear, equilibrium. For the first time in my life, I wasn't reacting to him. I was meeting him at structural parity. He didn't hang up abruptly. He didn't threaten. He simply said, "We'll discuss this at the director level." Exactly. Because this was no longer family. It was governance. And governance doesn't applaud. It calculates. Not panic, adjustment, short-term stock dip, long-term stability projection upgrade. Investors prefer restraint during uncertainty. They don't applaud it, they fund it. And that's when I understood something fully. Power isn't taking the seat at the head of the table. It's deciding how heavy that seat becomes. And my father had just realized it was no longer weightless. The director meeting wasn't scheduled publicly. No press notice, no emergency declaration, no dramatic headlines. Just a calendar update marked governance review. When I walked into the executive conference room that afternoon, nothing looked different. Same polished walnut table, same skyline view, same leather chairs arranged with deliberate symmetry. But the air had changed. Not tense, measured. My father sat at the head of the table like he always had. Except this time, he wasn't the only axis in the room. Corporate counsel began calmly. As of yesterday morning, 34% of outstanding voting shares have been transferred into the Monroe Governance Trust. Combined with existing aligned holdings, this creates a controlling coalition under trust management. No one reacted visibly, but pens stopped moving. 34% sounded small. Until you understood alignment math. 2 independent directors had historically voted alongside my grandmother. With the trust activated, their alignment created majority leverage. Not ownership dominance, decision influence. That distinction mattered. My father spoke evenly. This appears to be a technical restructuring. It does not alter executive authority. It was a controlled statement. He wasn't denying. He was narrowing scope. I responded without raising my voice. It alters oversight authority. Silence settled across the table. Oversight authority meant something specific. It meant executive decisions above a defined financial threshold now required trust acknowledgement. It meant capital allocations could be slowed. It meant expansion strategies could be reviewed. Not blocked, reviewed. One director leaned forward. "Arya, are you intending to assume operational leadership?" "No." Another pause. "Then what is your objective?" There it was, the real question. Not power, intent. "My objective," I said carefully, "is structural balance. No accusation, no emotional language, just design." I laid out documentation, prior accelerated project approvals, liquidity compression risk, over-leveraged positioning in emerging markets. Again, nothing illegal, just concentrated authority without counterweight. Boards don't fear illegality first. They fear instability. My father listened without interrupting. That told me something. He understood the room. If he attacked me, he would appear defensive. If he dismissed me, he would appear dismissive of governance. So he recalibrated. "This company has grown because of decisive leadership," he said. "Excessive oversight slows progress." He wasn't wrong. Speed builds empires, but unchecked speed fractures them. One of the longest-standing directors finally spoke. "Speed without alignment creates exposure." That was the first public deviation from automatic loyalty. Subtle, but meaningful. No vote was taken that day. No removal motion introduced. Instead, a resolution was drafted. Formation of a strategic oversight committee. 3 directors. 1 trust representative. Me, not CEO, not chair, not symbolic, structural. The resolution passed unanimously. Unanimous decisions are rarely emotional. They are calculated compromises. My father's title remained intact, but executive discretion narrowed. Expansion projects paused pending review. Debt instruments reevaluated. Future acquisitions required multi-signature approval. Not dramatic, effective. When the meeting adjourned, directors left quietly. No congratulations, no hostility, just recalculation. My father stayed seated as others exited. For a moment, it was just the 2 of us. "You could have approached me privately," he said. "I tried," I replied. His jaw tightened slightly. "This will change how the market perceives us. It will change how the board protects us." He stood slowly. "You think this is strength?" "No," I said calmly. "It's stability." That word landed. Because stability was the one thing investors valued more than charisma. He adjusted his cufflinks, a small habit he had when thinking strategically. "You've positioned yourself carefully." "Yes." Not defiance, not pride, just acknowledgement. For the first time in my life, he wasn't speaking to me like an inconvenience. He was speaking to me like a variable, and variables must be accounted for. That evening, Isabella called. No accusation, no anger, just tension beneath her voice. "Did you have to formalize it?" she asked. "Yes." "You've slowed everything." "I've balanced it." She was quiet. For years, she had believed leadership meant momentum. Now she was watching momentum meet resistance. "Do you want the company?" she asked. "No." "Then why insert yourself?" "Because absence had consequences." But I didn't say that. Instead, I said, Because influence without accountability is fragile. She didn't argue. That worried me more than if she had. By the end of the week, analysts noted a shift. The market reacted before the media did. By Monday morning, financial blogs were speculating about internal governance adjustments at Monroe Infrastructure. No scandal, no accusations, just uncertainty. Our stock dipped 4.2% in 2 days. Not catastrophic, but enough to make analysts ask questions. Investors requested clarification calls. Not with my father, with the oversight committee, with me included. That shift was subtle. But inside corporate ecosystems, subtle shifts are earthquakes. Inside the company, the atmosphere changed. Executives who once walked past me without eye contact suddenly scheduled alignment conversations. Department heads began forwarding me reports voluntarily, not because they liked me, because the signature structure had changed. Authority doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it's recognized through behavior. My father remained CEO, but something fundamental had altered. He no longer moved unilaterally. Major capital initiatives now paused at review checkpoints. Expansion into overseas markets was restructured into phased entry instead of full-scale deployment. Debt exposure reduced. Risk recalibrated. Within 6 weeks, the stock stabilized. Within 3 months, it rose above pre-dinner valuation. Analysts updated outlook. Improved governance transparency. Strengthened internal controls. Stability sells better than charisma. But the real shift didn't happen in reports. It happened in silence. One evening, long after most employees had left, I found my father alone in the executive conference room. City lights reflected across the glass walls. He wasn't reviewing numbers. He was staring at them. "You were right about the Southeast project," he said without looking at me. It wasn't an apology. It was an acknowledgement. The Southeast expansion had been his aggressive initiative. The Oversight Committee delayed it pending regulatory clarification. 2 months later, new regional policy changes would have cost the company millions. Delay saved us. He finally looked at me. "You're cautious." "Yes, you always were." There was no insult in it this time, just observation. "Caution isn't weakness," I said. "No," he replied quietly. "It isn't." That was the first conversation we'd ever had without competition underneath it. Not reconciliation, recognition. 3 months later, Monroe Infrastructure hosted a private investor summit. Smaller than the foundation dinner. No orchestra, no staged announcements. Just 40 key stakeholders in a controlled setting. I arrived early. No assigned corner table, no shadow. Just a place card at the central table. Aria Monroe, oversight chair, no other daughter, no narrative spin. Across the room, my father was speaking with institutional investors, measured, deliberate, aware. When the formal session began, the board chair took the podium. "We'd like to acknowledge the strategic governance adjustments that strengthened our long-term outlook this quarter." A pause. "And recognize the leadership behind that balance." He gestured toward me, not dramatically, just clearly. Applause followed, professional, intentional, respectful, the kind that doesn't laugh. I stood, not because I needed validation, but because this time the room wasn't confused about who I was. Across the room, my father met my eyes. He gave a small nod. Not dominance, not surrender. Equilibrium. I nodded back. For the first time in my life, we were not standing in hierarchy. We were standing in balance. Later that night, walking through the city, I caught my reflection in a darkened window. For years, I believed power looked loud, commanding, unquestioned. I was wrong. Power is steadier than that. It doesn't erase, it doesn't perform, it doesn't humiliate, it recalibrates. The night my father announced I had chosen to leave, he thought he was closing my chapter. He was triggering my position. And the difference between being removed and becoming essential is knowing where the leverage truly sits. Power changes rooms, but it also changes people. 6 months after the trust activation, Monroe Infrastructure no longer felt like my father's empire. It felt like an institution again. Oversight wasn't slowing us down. It was refining us. Projects were approved with layered review. Debt ratios stabilized. Investor confidence strengthened. Internally, something else shifted. Executives no longer competed for proximity to authority. They prepared for scrutiny. Transparency has a way of disciplining behavior, but the most difficult adjustment wasn't corporate. It was personal. One evening, Isabella asked to meet. Not at the office, not at a board function, at a quiet cafe 2 blocks away. She looked composed, as always, but less certain. "You didn't try to take the CEO role," she said. "No, you could have." "Yes." She studied me carefully. "Why didn't you?" "Because I didn't want his chair. I wanted structural fairness." But this time I answered fully. Because leadership isn't about sitting at the head of the table. It's about making sure the table doesn't collapse. That lingered between us. For years, we had competed for approval we didn't even define. Now, the competition felt unnecessary. "You changed," she said. "I stopped waiting," I replied. Not waiting to be invited. Not waiting to be acknowledged. Not waiting to be chosen. She nodded slowly. For the first time, we weren't rivals in succession. We were participants in governance. That difference softened something between us. A month later, my father requested a private meeting. No agenda, no legal teams, just us. He didn't open with criticism. He didn't defend his past decisions. He asked one question. "When did you stop trying to impress me?" The honesty in it surprised me. "I didn't," I said. "I stopped needing to." That answer landed differently than any argument ever had. For most of my life, I thought I was fighting for recognition. I wasn't. I was fighting for permission. Permission to speak. Permission to belong. Permission to matter. The trust didn't give me power. It revealed that I had always been capable of holding it. My father leaned back in his chair. "You're not who I prepared for leadership," he said. "I know." A pause. "But you might be who the company needed." It wasn't an apology. It wasn't praise. It was alignment. And that was enough. A year after that foundation dinner, Monroe Infrastructure reported its strongest fiscal quarter in a decade. Not because we expanded faster, because we moved smarter. The oversight committee became permanent. Governance reforms were codified. No one spoke about that dinner anymore. The narrative had shifted. And so had I. I used to think being underestimated was a disadvantage. Now I understand its insulation. When no one expects you to lead, they don't prepare defenses against you. They don't study you. They don't guard against you. They assume you're not a factor. And the most dangerous position in any system is being overlooked until you're essential. The night my father publicly reassigned my future, he believed he was protecting his legacy. What he actually did was force me to define my own. Power isn't loud. It isn't theatrical. It doesn't need applause. It is steady. It is patient. It waits. And when the moment comes, it doesn't announce itself. It simply stands and doesn't move. If this story meant something to you, don't just scroll past it. Like this video so more people who feel invisible get reminded they're not powerless. Subscribe if you believe quiet strength is still strength. And if you're building your move in silence, stay with me. There's more coming.